and shadow from darkness till noon. Over mountains that reach from the sky to the moon. A man with a dream that will never let go. Keep searching to find El Dorado.
Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. Can you get PTSD from religion? We are going to ask that question to the founder of Recovering from Religion, Dr. Daryl Ray, and Owen Younger from the Skeptical Texans. Here we go.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
I'm Daryl Ray, author of The God Virus and Sex and God, and founder of Recovering from Religion and the Secular Therapy Project.
Hi, I'm Owen Younger, one half of the Skeptical Texans Project.
And you are listening to The Right to Reason.
Could you preach for us and then tell us what it is you mean?
I'm biblical. Both ways.
Could you, Duffy? Could you? In your own words.
What you want me?
Yeah, whatever you want to do.
Okay.
Well, there's a verse. You want him to preach?
Yeah.
Get up and preach. Get up and preach.
Come on, Duffy.
Yeah, go ahead. Stand up right where you are if you want to. Go ahead.
Jeffy, do you want to preach?
If you want to. If you don't want
the
to,
audience shouldn't be able to intimidate you into this. If you want to do it, it's up to you.
Whosoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him also shall the Son of Man be ashamed.
Okay. Now, wait a minute. Wait just a minute, please. People want to know what that means that you just said. In your own word, tell us, what does that mean?
That's just what it says.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Dr. Daryl Ray, you have authored, help my memory here, there was The God Virus. I loved it. And was the second one Sex and God?
Right.
Sex and God, yeah.
Yep.
I liked the cover on that book. It had a nice plump ass on it. You also, that's not all you did.
That was my designer's idea, not mine.
Well, it's good marketing. You did Recovering from Religion. You founded also Secular Therapy Project. You also started, and you no longer host, but you also started, what was that podcast you did about sexuality or something like that?
Secular Sexuality.
Yes.
The ACA picked that up, and they're still doing it and doing a great job with it every Thursday night.
Yes, they are. We went on that, the wife and I, we still laugh about this. Anytime I talk, and I think it was just coincidence, bad audio, but anytime I talk, my volume's super low. And then, I'd say something like, yeah, and that's when she pulls her panties down, or, whatever I was saying. And then she would talk, like, you wouldn't hear me. And then she would talk and be like, that's when he pulled my panties down. And like that part you hear. And every time I would speak, you couldn't hear it. but you always keyed in on the wife. And I felt a little jealous.
Well, I'm sorry. I was kind of an amateur. I still am. This whole sound thing on podcast was defeating me at that moment. But I enjoyed that. It was really good. I'm glad we connected because we've actually been friends ever since.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that as well. And you even helped me out with school. I was working on my undergrad at the time in political science, and you helped me with one of my classes. And I told Candace Gorham about it, a recent guest that you connected me with, and I'm very grateful. She is brilliant, and I really enjoyed her contribution to the broadcast. But anyway, I don't know if I ever thanked you in person, but thank you for what you did with helping out with my school stuff. I really appreciate it.
Well, glad I did. I hope you got a decent grade from it, and they didn't discount you because I'm an atheist or anything.
No, I didn't tell them, but I got a B. If I'd have told them I would have got a C maybe, but I didn't tell them. We're also joined We're having fun. We're ignoring Owen. We're also joined with Owen Younger from skepticaltexans.org. Tell us a little bit about what you and Rex are working on and what you guys have in the future, please.
So Rex Burks and I are two former fundamentalist Christians who are now atheists. We're based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. We started the Skeptical Texans Project 4 or 5 years ago as a sort of an exploration of the diversity within Christianity that we think Christians themselves are not terribly aware of. And it's been a fascinating road, and it helps us to prepare for conversations with Christians across the spectrum to address their beliefs as they hold them and not as we might straw man them. And I think it makes us more effective conversationalists with our counterparties. And I just want to say, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Ray. I could show you my Kindle library right now, but I acquired The God Virus in April of 2010, more than 10 years ago, and read it on my Kindle. And in October of 2012, I got Sex and God and have read that. I'm a huge fan of your work, and it's kind of a jazz to be on a podcast with you. For the record, I'm just here for comic relief. You two are the
well, that's cool. You're an early adopter, because both books you purchased were within the year they were published. That's pretty cool.
Right. So so to this point, I mean, this kind of gets me to the point of what Skeptical Texans is all about. Rex and I met each other probably 6 years ago. And as both former sort of fundamentalist Christians, I was from a more evangelical background, and he came from a sort of a different denomination that he actually called a cult. But we met each other and realized that in my exit from Christianity, I didn't really spend a lot of time looking at more liberal versions of the faith. I just realized I didn't believe it and walked away. Rex went through sort of a different transition away from the faith, and he spent a lot of time sort of going to other churches and sort of spending more time researching. It almost originated, the Skeptical Texans Project almost originated in a bet in his living room on New Year's Day of probably about 2015. And he said, I bet you we could go to a church this weekend and find Christians who don't believe in the afterlife. And I thought that was impossible. Like, there's no way. For me, the Christianity I came out of, that was the point. And sure enough, we tried it. I took him up on it. We put on suits and went to a Presbyterian church, the Frozen Chosen. And about halfway through class, Rex says, hey, can I just interrupt for a second? Can I have a show of hands? Is there anybody in here that doesn't really think the afterlife is literal? And we had hands come up.
Wait. Owen, he said that in the service? He said, can I get a show of hands?
Well, we're in a Bible study class.
That's crazy. But even a Bible study, that's crazy.
Yeah, but that's what we do. We go to churches and attend adult Bible study classes and interact with the Christians there, and then take pretty extensive notes about what we find, and it's just fascinating.
Yeah, Owen's a pilot with a plane, and Darrel, he will be talking to a preacher, and the preacher will say, well, I wish you could come by sometime and talk to the congregation. Owen's like, yeah, I'll be there at noon.
I'll be there.
Hey, what do you fly? What do you fly, Owen? I love small planes.
So I fly for a living. I fly Hawkers and Citations.
Oh, okay.
But my own little airplane's a Piper Arrow.
He even wrecked one and survived.
Oh, wow. Whoa.
So when you guys were talking about, I realized we're not doing PTSD today, but I was in a pretty serious plane crash in May of 2018. It was actually the day of one of my presentations to a free thought group in Houston. Rex and I went down there to talk to them about the Skeptical Texans Project, and had lunch with them. And that afternoon I was going to fly home and had a mechanical failure in one of my flight controls. And I was fortunate to walk away, but that had a kind of an impact on me.
Mechanical failure. Well, he was boozing a little is what it was. No, I'm just kidding.
No.
Well, an accident of that type can create PTSD. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I'll tell you, it did. I to this day, it doesn't really bother me so much in the jet, but I'm flying my airplane. I'm flying a little airplane, little 4-seat. I feel anxious with turbulence and things. I never used to. Like I was this fearless guy before that, and it gets in your head, it's when I do the walk around inspection of the airplane before I fly myself, sometimes I'll go check the ailerons several times, just make sure they're attached properly,
because that was what it was.
That's what it was in the serious
fascinating
Wow.
Darrel, I want to ask you something. Marlene Winnell, and I wanted to play a clip from her. Before I do, can you tell us a little bit about her, because there's something that she said. It was at a talk on religious trauma syndrome back in, Jesus, this might have been 10 years ago. And it's creepy, man. It's creepy. The thing that she says, it's a real short clip. I just want to play it. But before I do, who is this lady?
Well, she was raised in a fundamentalist missionary family. I don't know a lot about her background, just what she's told me. And she eventually escaped, and she got a degree in clinical counseling. And as a result of her own practice and her own personal experience, realized that there was some serious damage being done by many religions, especially high control religions. And that's what motivated her to write her book, Leaving the Fold, which we recommend a lot at Recovering from Religion, and also gave her the notion to create the term religious trauma syndrome that we're going to probably be talking a bit about today. So, and I've known Marlene for, I don't know, 10, 12 years, and really admire her courage and the work that she's done to raise awareness around the damage especially high control religions cause in people's lives.
If I recall, Council on, I want to get to the clip, but Council on Religious Trauma, that was Court 2020. That was a big deal. COVID really screwed that up, but they still were able to pull it off, and they got another one coming. Am I correct on that?
Yes, I'll be speaking at that one as well. Yeah. It screwed it up in the sense of the live face-to-face, but quite frankly, I thought the conference was amazing.
Yes,
it was really cool. So they're going to do another one in, I believe it's April, and it'll be online as well. Not going to do a face-to-face because I think we probably touched more people like being online than we ever would having a live conference.
A larger outreach. It forced a larger outreach. It actually, that's going to be Court 2022?
2020, yeah, right.
All right, I will add that link in the show notes. Also, to the listeners, all of Darrel's books will be linked in the show notes. Recovering from Religion, Secular Therapy Project, you can find all that there, and also skepticaltexans.org. Any amount of this conversation that you want to look into, you'll find that in today's show notes. Here is Marlene Winnell.
I still had a lot of mixed feelings because for me, there was a lot of loss. There was a lot of grief. I would say Jesus was like my first lover. I was very emotionally involved.
That part creeped me out. And out of context, that might seem a little awkward. There was a lot before that and a lot that followed. I would encourage anybody to look into Marlene Winnell a little bit. But she referred to Christ, to God, as her first lover. That's bizarre to me, but I get it. I grew up very fundamentalist. So as a man, that's not how he was presented. But I can definitely say my sexuality was tied to my beliefs.
Well, I'm fond of telling people that are married Christians that if you're a married Christian having sex, you're having a threesome with Jesus.
Inadvertently.
Yeah, well, there's so much, so many issues around sexuality within almost any, especially all patriarchal religions. It's not funny. So the fact that Marlene said that is just another angle on sexual repression. I mean, look at the Catholics. Everything they do is practically sexual, and they don't admit it. I mean, the iconography is torturous. I'd almost say the Catholics are the first BDSM organization on the planet.
Jesus.
Because everything is torture, and the nuns are married to the church. I mean, that's literally what they say. They are married to the church. So sounds to me like it's sexual. Anyway, that's not what we're going to be talking about here today. I can talk about sex too, though.
I know you can. You big perv. But
yeah, well.
but in reference to how women's sexualities are controlled, not just by the patriarchy, but within religion. I know we were just earlier talking about my wife when she was on your podcast. That was her experience. She explained to me was that itself was traumatizing because I don't want to get too personal about our love life, but I went on secular sexuality. What am I worried about? But anyway, I'm just saying, early on, now she's a freak. She's out there, but early on, lights needed to be off, a t-shirt on, that sort of thing. She had been traumatized by some kind of Mexican mixture of Catholicism and Baptist fundamentalism.
Absolutely. A whole lot of trauma comes out of sexual abuse or sexual trauma. And that's why it's been so interesting and why I wanted to talk about this kind of stuff for the last 10 or 15 years. I think religion uses, especially the patriarchal religions, they use your sexuality against you. From the day you're born, your body is your enemy. And That is what you're taught. Whether you're a Baptist or a Catholic, your body is your enemy. Your sexual urges are the Satan, and and Catholics do exorcisms around this kind of shit. And what is exorcism if not a massively traumatic event for some poor kids being subjected to that? I see too much of that. I could go on and on about it.
Sure. Owen, have you experienced religious trauma in your personal life?
I have. I was raised in a fundamentalist evangelical environment, in a family, in a church, in a congregation, in an extended family. I would add right wing to that.
Yes.
And everything Dr. Ray said sort of resonates with me. The Apostle Paul says, it's better to pluck out your own eye than have it offend God, right? We were taught that as little boys, these urges we had were evil, that was Satan inside of us. The purity culture that you kind of see now in the sort of 21st century hadn't really, it wasn't called that in 1980 when I was a kid. But those ideas were very present. That there was something wrong with looking at girls, and there was something wrong with girls who were pretty. You shouldn't look at them. Anyway, I could go on.
And the girls were sluts. If they're pretty, they're slutty. Like that. Right. That was a theme. At least I don't know about your experience, but in mine, I was in a Christian school. It was Gilead Christian Academy in Macon, Georgia. And I remember they forced, and I was in love with this girl. She was a senior, and I was a freshman, and she was it, man. She was like the cheerleading girl. She was just a knockout. But they bring her up in front of everybody in the church, because we would go to chapel every Wednesday. They bring her up in chapel, and she stands behind that same pulpit that the fucking preacher did every Sunday, and they forced her to say, "I had sex, and I am ashamed." Wow. And this girl broke down crying in front of all of us. And I got to tell you, what I felt in my heart at that time as an indoctrinated young man was judgment. It wasn't pity. Right now, I've got a 16-year-old daughter. You know what I mean? That's probably similar to the age this girl was at. I couldn't imagine some asshole putting her through that shit. The things I would want to do to that man, I wouldn't want to say on this recording for legal reasons, of a person that would put her in that scenario. But they did this. The name evades me, but I remember her face. I remember that moment, her standing behind that pulpit, and she wept and apologized to her underclassmen for being a bad example, because she had sex with the linebacker at our football. I do remember his name. It was Kendall. And he got a concussion one time. I remember that. I'm rambling. But anyway, it is a traumatic fucking bullshit experience that they put these young girls through. And I'm so grateful that my daughter isn't experiencing it, but I saw my sister experience it growing up in a very similar background to you gentlemen.
It's hard to even imagine that happening, and yet I've heard it dozens of times. I mean, that
is commonplace.
The first time.
It's not to a lot of us in the secular community that maybe didn't come out of fundamentalism. There's a whole smorgasbord of different secularist backgrounds and experiences. But to those that don't come out of it, it sounds bizarre. We're like, that sounds like some cult shit. No, that's everywhere. That's the fucking norm.
Yeah. And so I live in Texas. I mean, for me, this, I live in Baptist Central, right? But so the purity culture piece of it is important, but the trauma really from breaking away from dogma was even deeper for me, and it touches more levels than just that. It alienated everyone in my family. To this day, I've got a brother who's 2 years younger than me, and he won't speak to me. I'm evil, right? Wow. I'm the bad guy. There was a year, longer than a year's time as a teenager when my father wouldn't speak to me. My mother made me promise never to tell my grandmother that I was an atheist, and it's such an awkward chasm in my family that at Thanksgiving I would go visit my grandmother, and we've got the extended family. She'll call on me to say the prayer. Like, that's not my home. I don't feel like it's my, I can't even be honest about why I'm not going to pray to a non-existent God. I just have to figure out a way to excuse myself. I'm not the only person who suffered trauma from that. My mother, who is still a Christian, is 70 years old. I'm 48, so I'll put this out there a little bit. As I was going through my college years, I watched my mother, who was a beautiful, wonderful, amazing, loving person. It to me is, for a lot of reasons, sort of the representation of the American dream, And my mother, a divorced woman who kind of had to go through all of the trauma and judgment of being divorced in a fundamentalist Christian congregation, had to suffer that a second time 10 years later when her son outed himself as an atheist. And now she had to go through feeling like she was a failure. The most fundamental responsibility she had as a mother, she failed at. And I watched her struggle with that for years. And she finally kind of realized that she doesn't have to feel that way. But this religion of love, this religion of peace, foists so much judgment, so much bitterness, so much division, that it creates so many in-group, out-group schisms, right? That you wonder why the people who believe it think that they're onto something good. I don't get it, and I still don't. I'll say I'll end my little tirade here with this observation. Whatever sort of evolutionary benefit might have come from delusional thinking in our ancient ancestors has well and truly passed. Like in the modern world, there is no place for magical thinking or this reinforcement of in-groups and out-groups that Christianity and other religions reinforce. It's time for us to put all of that in the rearview mirror. I'll say it. The world would absolutely be a better place without Christianity. And it's time for us to advocate for it.
Dr. Ray, I want to present something. This is from the Restoration Council. It's an LLC out of Seattle. Let me throw these past you, and you tell me if these line up with what you would describe as commonly experienced symptoms of religious trauma. The first one is confusing thoughts and reduced ability to think critically. I think that's an easy one.
Yeah. Yep.
Negative beliefs about self, others, and the world. Trouble making decisions. Feelings of depression, anxiety, grief, anger, lethargy. A sense of feeling lost, directionless, and alone. I can attest to that. Was my early experiences for sure. A lack of pleasure or interest in things you used to enjoy. That seems a little vague. I don't know. Continuing, a loss of community, family, friends, romantic relationships. That's probably another softball in this list. Feeling isolated or a sense that you don't belong. Feeling behind the times with cultural happenings. Holy shit, Darrell. That one's interesting. And I didn't just see that with myself. I saw that with my siblings as well. You keep telling people I grew up sheltered, but they have no idea I grew up in what you might not understand as a cult, but it's pretty much the same. It's just the cult leader's been dead for a couple hundred years, but it's the same thing. The last one, other symptoms including nightmares, flashbacks, disassociation, and emotional difficulty. Does that line up, at least in your experience in education, with results of religious trauma?
Yes, but I want to start off with a disclaimer right off the bat.
Okay.
No, anybody listening to us talk today should not use this podcast as a way to self-diagnose.
Okay.
And all the symptoms you just put out there, they're very vague. I mean, they could be true of a lot of different conditions. So this person that you're reading from is trying to, show what she can do. And there's nothing wrong with what she's doing there. But don't use that to diagnose yourself. There's 5 different main criteria you have to use to diagnose somebody with a PTSD diagnosis. And I'm not talking religious trauma there. I'm talking just basic PTSD trauma. And some of those fit, some of them don't, with what she just what you just read from that person. So I just want to start with saying I'm not saying it's a hard and fast science, but there's more science here than simply reading some things and ask, does that fit me? There's, for example, some of the criteria you have to experience for at least a month. Other criteria you have to for at least 6 months. There's other things. Did you actually experience the trauma, or was it vicariously experienced? I mean, there's a lot of things that a good therapist, a psychologist, or a social worker, or LMS, licensed mental health counselor, is going to ask to try and understand what you're experiencing, and they may or may not identify that as trauma. What we're talking about here today is what traumas religion cause. And Owen illustrated that very well, and just in his own life story, and you've given some ideas as well. I know when I've talked to you in the past. So don't diagnose yourself. It's that old saying, a lawyer defends himself as a fool for a client. Well, it's the same for all of us. We're really bad at self-assessment. So let somebody else do that work, somebody that's actually been trained in it.
And at the risk of beating a dead horse, a good resource that the listener could go to would be the Secular Therapy Project.
Right.
And I can attest to that. My wife and I have gone to multiple marriage counseling places over the years. We've been married a long time. There's ups and downs. During the downs, we tried to work on it, and during the ups, you try to remember the good times, But in the times that we could use help, I remember one in particular. It was okay. Before I get to the one, very difficult to find professional help in that regard that's not religiously based, especially in Central Texas. I'm sure Owen can attest to that. But one of the experiences, we go to a therapist and we find her from a recommendation of a coworker. She's great, and all this stuff. And so we contact her. She gives us the address. I put it in the phone. We pull up. It's a fucking church, Darrel. It's a fucking church. We walk in and, we go past, we meet the preacher and all this shit. And we're atheists at this point. This isn't like early on when I was a Christian. As soon as I walk into her office, I say, hey, we specifically requested non-religious counseling. She's like, no, I'm just using the space. Easy. Lighten up, guys. And it wasn't 10 minutes. We didn't even get to finish talking about how she needs to do the fucking dishes or I need to do the fucking laundry. We didn't even start complaining about, cliche marriage problems that we had in our youth, but before she starts recommending Bible verses anyway, I say all that to say, I think the Secular Therapy Project's a great thing. And I appreciate what you're doing there.
Right. Yeah. Somebody can just sign it. Go to seculartherapy.org and register as a client. It's all. You can even be anonymous. We don't care. And it'll help you find somebody that's certified and ain't going to send you back to church or tell you to read a Bible. That's for sure.
What are some indicators if somebody's listening right now and they think maybe I've got religious trauma or maybe I'm just being a wimp. I need to toughen up, or what are some indicators that they could go, you know what? Dr. Ray really hit the nail on the head on that one. That's totally what I'm experiencing, and I might need to reach out, make some changes, or ask for some help.
Well, like I said earlier, don't self-diagnose. But if you do think after you listen to us, if you think you got something, then go find somebody to help you. Well, let me begin by saying me and my colleagues at Recovery from Religion probably see more evidence of religious trauma than anybody else on the planet. I don't know where else you would go to find the number of people coming with the same complaints. And these complaints are very consistent across the board. Well over half of the clients that come to us are dealing with night terrors related or something like that related to fear of hell or the afterlife punishment or Armageddon. There's that configuration of afterlife kinds of fears. And it gets in the way of their daily living. It gets in the way of their relationships with other people. Fear of hell is probably number one issue people come to us about. And that's the second most common thing that comes to us is I am scared to death of my own sexuality. When I masturbate, I feel terribly guilty afterwards. Or when I look at porn, or when I talk to my wife or my husband about sex, I get all frustrated and I can't have good sex with my own wife, even though that's what Jesus said I could do once I got married. So sex is really a big, big piece of what people come to us. And I would say number one is fear of hell. Number two is sex and sexuality. And that within the sex and sexuality things are I'm gay and I've been married for 20 years. What do I do? Or my child just came out as trans and I'm still stuck in that mental Christian mindset about what sexuality can and can't be. What do I do? My child my wife just told me she's bisexual. I'm trying to work through that. Or a woman says I'm bisexual, or a man says I'm bisexual. There's all these things that they come to us with, and it's all directly related to religious programming that started in childhood. So I would like to go back to the very beginning of where do people get trauma most often, and that's in childhood. I would recommend listeners go to online. You can go online and take it's a little test. It's called the ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences Test, ACE. It was actually created by the Centers for Disease Control. And you can go take it. It's a short test, probably no more than 10 questions. And if you score a certain number, it probably indicates you have suffered you have suffered trauma of some kind as a child. Now, you may not be suffering today, but chances are if you had serious traumatic events happening in your life as a child, they're affecting you as an adult, and you may or may not even know it. So I would recommend using that as a first step towards deciding if you're experiencing some kind of trauma. Now, the second step I would throw out is that the ACE test, ACE, does not deal with religion. In fact, there's nothing related to religion in it. But if you were beaten severely for 3 or 4 years when you're a young child, that's one thing. If you were beaten severely for 3 or 4 years as a young child by your extremely fundamentalist religious parents, that's another thing. And that means that whatever trauma came out of that is directly connected to the religion. And that's when we can start talking about religious trauma, because much child abuse, a huge amount of child abuse, is directly related to religious ideology. You almost can't separate a significant amount of child abuse from religious ideology. I mean, spare the rod, spoil the child kind of notions create all sorts of trauma in children.
For me, I know my dad was a preacher, and it's really easy to make him the villain in this story, but he was indoctrinated as well. And I used to be angry with him for the very thing I'm about to say. And then as I got a little bit older and had children of my own, I started to realize this shit's infecting all of us, man. We've got to have some compassion for the believers as well. And it's not them, it's the virus that infects them. I remember growing up, if I did anything wrong, I wasn't just being a bad kid that needed a spanking. I was offending God because the father was the head of the home and God put him in that place. I think that shit fucked me up. I really do. And I don't think I'm being oversensitive about it as a man.
That resonates with me a lot. And I want to sort of reiterate something I said earlier. It's one thing for the people who have managed to escape the sort of religious construct, that they were raised in. Something else entirely for the people who are stuck in it, who do not recognize the trauma it has caused them, and who remain addicted to it in a way that's very similar to an abused spouse, a battered spouse remaining in an abusive marriage. I think about, again, my mother, who might listen to this, so I'm going to just be honest and say it anyway. She was raised in an environment where the man is the head of the house, as Christ is the head of the, and she believed that. She signed up for that. That was her responsibility. That was her role. She lived up to the expectations that she was raised with, she suffered tremendously in having to face a divorce where judgment was foisted onto her, and it to the point where we had to leave the congregation and change churches. And I remember her saying to me, I'm a young teen. I was 12 and my parents were divorced, and it was an ugly divorce. She was excited. I remember her coming and saying, "Hey, I found a church that's got a singles again group for adults." And because in 1985, you had to be a really progressive church to find something like that, in Texas, right? And just to frame the sort of conversation, I was raised in the Church of Christ, where if you had an instrument playing it while you were singing to the Lord, God was ignoring you because you were doing it wrong. Like, that's right. How fundamentalist these people were. And so the people I worry most for are not the people who manage to get out, because now they can go read Dr. Ray's books and seek help, right, through secular pathways. The people I worry about are the people who are still stuck in it, who can't get out of it. I'm worried about the kids in Jesus camp. I'm worried about the kinds of adults that they're going to grow up to be and have no idea how fucked up they are. Am I allowed to say fucked up?
You fucking are.
Okay. I don't know if you're going to bleep that or not, but no. Yeah. By the way,
I will say that's...
I took the ACE quiz. While you were talking before, I took the ACE quiz.
Oh, you already took it?
Yeah, okay. I did while you were in your prior...
It's pretty fast, isn't it? It's pretty easy.
It is. It took me all of 90 seconds.
Yeah. But it's a very powerful thing, and it's based on very good basic research. And so I trust it a lot. If you score high enough, then you probably want to I'm not talking about you, Owen. I mean, if a person listening here scores high enough, then I would suggest go find a good therapist. Tell them you got what the score on the ACE test was and see if you need to work through some things. But I want to go back to the symptoms because I can give you very specific things, Robert, that I didn't want to do earlier because I wanted to preface all this. But let me just throw out some symptoms that are very common. I talked about what we see, fear of hell and that sort of stuff. But here's the symptoms: spontaneous or cued, recurrent, involuntary, intrusive, distressing memories of the events, whatever those events were that caused the trauma. And this is not just related to religion. I'm using just the DSM-5 categories right now. Recurring distressing dreams in which the content or affect of the dream is related to the event. In both of those cases, I could say that's what we hear people telling us about fear of hell. It's an involuntary fear. It's an involuntary dream. So we can just take that piece and drop it right into the secular DSM-5 category, so to speak. Disassociated reactions, flashbacks. I mean, we've all heard about flashbacks from people who went through Vietnam, for example, or have gone through combat. Well, I know religious recovery people who have flashbacks of being forced to go up on the stage and admit they had sex. I mean, that would cause me a flashback, I'll tell you that, if I had to do that. Intense or prolonged psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues. So seeing a cue or something that cues me to one of these things is another symptom, so to speak. And marked psychological reactions or reminders of the event. So we already heard one from Owen a minute ago earlier about the airplane. Mm-hmm. But the fact that you go around and you double check the ailerons says that you've got a triggered marked reaction based upon your previous experience in the traumatic event of having a plane crash, and thankfully walking away from it. But I'm not going to say you are currently traumatized by it, but that memory is triggered. If just having that is not necessarily a criteria, there's other things that we would have to hear. For example, I was in a car wreck 10, 12 years ago where somebody rear-ended me. I'm setting still on an entry to the interstate. A woman hits me in the back. I get a pretty big jar out of it. But I'll tell you, for years after that, probably 5 or 6 years after that, whenever I got onto an entry, a ramp onto the interstate, I would have that memory. It would be triggered just by that event. I didn't experience that I don't experience that anymore, really, or not very often. But that's just one example. What happened, though, if that event was far more intrusive and I couldn't get rid of it? I couldn't go to sleep because of it. I couldn't concentrate on my schoolwork. If that's happening, then we probably got true trauma, and that's when professional help is needed because it won't go away on its own. And we have really good treatment methodologies for helping someone with that nowadays. We didn't have it 12, 15 years ago, but now we've got them. Really good treatment methodologies.
Can I ask a question that's tangentially related to that?
I think you should.
And feel free to edit this out.
No, please do.
EMDR treatment. Mm-hmm. Is that real or is that quack?
Thank you. No, thank you so much for asking that. I have been wondering that's typically used for BPD. Am I correct?
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to give you the professional and then we get the layperson. Professionally speaking, EMDR is reasonably effective for some conditions.
And if I can interrupt you, just for the listener, and please correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, but this is where you're moving your eyes or tapping your finger while replaying traumatic events. Am I close?
Yes, and okay. And the clinical evidence for the eyes and the finger tapping is the weakest.
Okay.
For the reprocessing component. The part that's strongest for it is actually the part that comes straight out of cognitive behavioral therapy, because EMDR is really trying to marry cognitive behavioral therapy with some physiological stuff like tapping and eye movement. The research right now, and I don't want to get hate mail,
sure,
because I know people who go to therapists and swear by EMDR. So I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying that the clinical evidence only supports about half of the EMDR. So I'm not saying don't get it. It's not quackery, but it's borderline since it hasn't had enough clinical evidence put to it yet. At the same time, the placebo effect works pretty damn well sometimes. So you could use tapping and the placebo might help you get through it. I don't know which it is. and I'm not here to tell you it's good or bad. There are bad types of therapy. I mean, if somebody tries to do Jungian therapy with you, or Adlerian therapy, or Freudian bullshit, yeah, that's quackery, and we've known that for decades. But the newer treatments, there's a lot better clinical evidence. For example, in treatment of trauma, the U.S. government's put a hell of a lot of money into trauma treatment directly as a result of, the wars in the Middle East and having soldiers come back with terrible conditions that we couldn't treat after the Vietnam War. But now we've got the evidence. We've seen the mental MRI, the brain scans. There's been quite a bit of stuff going on now with brain imaging that can help us understand what's going on in the brain and how can we reprogram the brain. And that's basically what you're doing, because a traumatic event like a plane crash or a traumatic event like being forced to confess to your sins in front of the whole church, either one of those can literally reprogram the brain instantly. It's one trial learning. You burn your hand on the stove. It doesn't take 3 times to burn your hand on the stove. It only takes 1. And your brain has already learned, don't do that again. Well, that's kind of what we're seeing in the plane crash, or that's what we're seeing in the confessing your sins in front of the church, is it's one-shot learning. Unfortunately, it's one-shot learning that's not functional, and it gets in the way of your life in the future. I mean, if Owen, you never got on a plane again because of that event, then we would have pretty good evidence you were traumatized by it. And it was one-shot learning, but it was one-shot learning that ruins your career. And then that makes no sense. But it makes sense when you understand what's going on in the brain. And that's what religious trauma is. It's creating a condition in the brain where the person starts avoiding things. For example, I have worked with people the last decade, a whole lot of people who have never been married because they're traumatized about their own sexuality. And they were told they can't have sex until they're married. And yet, if they did, and think about this, in this day and age, virtually everybody has sex before you get married. Well, if your Jesus says you can't have sex before you get married, and all the candidates out there want to have sex before you get married, then you basically are not going to have sex. So I've worked with many 40-year-old virgins, male and females, and they said, I'm scared to death of being dating because they're going to want to have sex, and I've been told I can't have sex until I'm married. You know, it's a catch-22 for them. And I'm looking at them and saying, you are traumatized by this crazy purity culture that Owen already mentioned. Purity culture has fucked up a lot of people's sex lives, fucked up a lot of marriages, fucked up just a lot of good relationships that people could have. And they're missing out on major parts of their life because of it.
I just want to say I'm glad I'm not the only person on this podcast that said fuck. We all one of them is a respected author and
He didn't just say fuck. He appeared, I don't remember which conference it was. It was an atheist conference, and you put yourself up on the projector, a nude image of yourself saying, let's stop being ashamed of our bodies. It was a boss move.
That's awesome.
You don't remember how I started that talk, I'll bet.
No, I don't.
Well, my first question to the entire group was, how many of you masturbate? I do. And then I ended it because, and this is the thing, even atheists still have got this program.
Yes.
Even atheists are still traumatized. I was at the American Atheist Convention about 4 years ago, and a guy who'd read my books comes up to me and says, I need to talk to you. And we go off in the corner and we sit and talk. And the guy's a 40-year-old virgin, handsome guy. I mean, this guy should have no trouble catching any woman he wanted. He just was a hunk. And yet, I'm jealous of the guy.
Yeah.
And yet he's never had a relationship in his whole life based upon the traumatic experience he had with purity culture when he was a teenager, and the notion, and he's an atheist now. So I'm here to try and debunk some of the shit that people still have even after they leave religion. That's why I founded Recover from Religion, because people need help to deal with this stuff. You're not alone. There's a lot of people out there. They're experiencing the same thing you are.
And you nailed it, Dr. Ray, when you said this early on. All patriarchal religions are obsessed with controlling sexuality. I don't want to get pulled into politics, but that manifests itself in a lot of the positions that the modern GOP takes relative to women and reproductive rights. It's all an extension of the same basic idea that reproduction should be controlled and dominated by male culture. But I think that's the reason ultimately that sexuality keeps coming up as part of this trauma. Is sexuality is one of the kernels in the middle of the control that religion tries to assert over lives.
Sure.
Well, Dr. Waddell, and I has said this, and I don't remember exactly how. You quoted her earlier in the audio, Robert, and I agree with her. You really can't separate religious recovery and sexual trauma because they were caused by the same root. I've met very few people that I thought didn't have sexual issues when they came out of religion that they still needed to deal with. Everything from just how do I have sex with myself to how do I look at porn and not feel guilty about it, or how do I enjoy my partner, my wife or whatever, because we're still stuck, or she's still a Christian and I'm not, kind of thing, or vice versa. So there's a lot there. I want to throw out some other pieces though that are unique to the religious trauma that we were talking about today, and that is other things that Owen mentioned, of course, was social isolation. Religion really does focus on use of social isolation, disfellowship, throwing you out of the community, throwing you out of the family, throwing you out of the church. And that is a very basic technique that is rooted in our evolutionary biology. In this way, if you're a child on the savannas of Western Africa, 50,000, 60,000 years ago, and you got thrown out of your family, thrown out of your clan, that was a death sentence. An individual human being cannot live in that environment alone. So you would either have to find a way to get back into your clan or find another clan that would take you. So we are deeply genetically programmed to follow our parents, to obey our parents, stay close in our clan, and that the worst thing that can happen to you, literally the worst thing that can happen to you in the savannas of Africa, is to be kicked out of your clan, because they provide protection from all these other dangers. We bring that deep genetic programming into our current day, and religion uses that. I mean, you would be right to be scared shitless of being kicked out of your clan 50,000 years ago.
Through the smoke, through the fire, just to save me.
But you will have the same response today when your parents say, if you don't go to church and confess your sins to Jesus, we're kicking you out of the house. You would have the same emotional response as that child 50,000 years ago would have. It feels life-threatening. And therein lies the trauma. Because religion, with that threat, religion tells you are going to die if you leave the church. And they literally use that language. You will be dead to God. You will be dead to the family. You'll be dead to Jesus. And they use that language. It's the same language that reality would tell you 50,000 years ago. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
That is why it's such a powerful tool for religion to use social isolation, disfellowship. Every church has got a different word for it. That's what's going on there. And it's deeply biological. I don't think we appreciate how religion currently uses our biology against us.
Just to save me.
You hinted at that earlier, Owen, when you mentioned there's no place today in evolutionary biology, but I would disagree with you in some ways on that count, because I think religion does exactly that. It takes our evolutionary biology and uses it against us. It takes our deeply programmed sexual drives and uses it against us. So religion's well tuned to take advantage of our natural biological urges and fears.
Dr. Daryl Ray from Recovering from Religion, the Secular Therapy Project, author of Sex and God and the God Virus. Thank you so much, sir. Also, Owen Younger from skepticaltexans.org. I love what you both are doing, and thank you for guesting this show and for talking to us today.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ray,
thanks.
it was wonderful to get to chat with you.
Good to have you too. Thanks for all you just said. Actually kind of tied us all together.
Thank you, sir. Y'all have a great evening.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
Robert.
Holidays.
I was down to the wire, then you came for me.
Thank you to Darrell and Owen. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to Feedspot.com for promoting the Right to Reason to the Top 10 Atheist Podcast. Thank you to our patrons, Rob Schreck, Larry Wilson, Michael Moore, Catherine Klass, Freethinker215, Phil Calderon, Brittany Catherman, Alan Marks, Philip Spawn, Bernard Lamberell, Anima Man, and our top supporter, Rob Montgomery. You You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, I'm talking to Christian apologist Robert Campanero about evolution and creationism. Between now and then, fight for your right to reason.
What about Fräulein Freisel in Austria, whose father, unwilling to get out of the way, kept her in a dungeon where she didn't see daylight for 24 years and came down most nights to rape and to sodomize her, often in front of the children who were the victims of the previous attacks and offenses. Imagine how she must have begged him. Imagine how she must have pleaded. Imagine for how long. Imagine how she must have prayed every day, how she must have beseeched heaven. Imagine, for 24 years, and no answer at all. Nothing. Now, you say that's all right that she went through that, because she'll get a better deal in another life? Are you, I have to ask you, if you can be morally or ethically serious and postulate such a question? No, that had to happen, and heaven did watch it with indifference, because it knows that score will later on be settled. So it was well worth her going through it. She'll have a better time next time. I don't see how you can look anyone in the face, or live with yourself and say anything so hideously, wickedly immoral as that, or even imply it. There, that's my answer.
This was the right to reason. Whether you used it or not is completely on your shoulders.
The right to reason sucks, and so does Robert Stanley.
This is the Right to Reason podcast.